Hey guys, chess coach Andrew Rankin here. Welcome back to another episode with Just Winning with White. Today I wanted to make an episode that demonstrates how you can play against the King's Indian Defense, or the KID. So this is something that I've talked with my students about. They've commented that they play against the King's Indian Defense quite a bit, and I thought that I'd show you guys some of the ideas that I like to use. So the King's Indian Defense is a response to the Queen's Gambit, or I should say it's a response to 1d4. So after d4, your opponent plays, well, my opponent played d6, but normally they start with the move knight to f6. But he played d6, c4, g6, knight to c3, bishop g7, a little bit of a weird move order. I just continued developing my knights, and now he goes knight to f6. Even though we transposed into a King's Indian Defense, let me show you what the normal move order is. So the normal move order is d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, knight f3, castles, or d6. So here we've gotten back to the position that we have in the game, and this is just your standard King's Indian Defense. So you notice that I just put my pawns on d4 and c4. I develop my knight to c3, I develop my knight to f3, and next you'll see that all my pieces just have very natural, normal development. That's why very early on I just really fell in love with the system, because it was just like, wow, this just makes total sense. So let me jump forward to, where he castles. So here we transpose into the same position, and now your bishop goes to g5. And this is called the Smyslov or Petrosian system. So we have the King's Indian Defense, which is the name of the opening, and the variation is the Smyslov/Petrosian variation. He continues with castling, and now the idea with putting the bishop out here is to fight against this strong dark square bishop, and we do that by playing the move e3. So in normal King's Indian defenses, you're going to play the move e4, and it's just going to be a complete tactical shootout. But instead we play a much more positional game, and we play the move e3. And the idea is that we're going to have this strong pawn supported by our e pawn, and we're going to play against this potentially really strong bishop on g7. So our opponent continues by putting the knight on d7. This might look like a weird move because the bishop is stuck back here, but the idea is actually very sound. The idea is to crack at the center with e5 or c5, and black wants to do that as fast as possible. Because the sooner this center pawn is undermined, the sooner this bishop becomes stronger. Okay, now number 2 is that we need to put our light square bishop on the square e2. The reason why we don't go to d3 is because we actually have no targets here. Because of this pawn structure, the bishop is actually not ever going to be attacking anything, and it's not a very good piece. Also, after the move e5, he could hit us with the move e4, which would fork our bishop and our knight. And that's never a tactic that we really want to give our opponent. So that's why bishop to e2 is a much better square. And you'll see that bishop on e2 creates some nice tactical threats that we have. So he continues with the move c5, and now we play the queen to c2. And it's very important that we put the queen on c2 before we castle. And the reason is because we have this very nice trap. If he plays the move h6, we drop the bishop back, keeping pressure on the knight, the pawn, and the queen. If he continues with g5, we drop the bishop back here. And now if he goes chasing our knight, let's see if you guys can find a really strong tactic here that should just win white the game. So the move knight to h5 is a blunder, and it's a big mistake because we have the move knight to g5. Now you see the bishop on e2 is really doing its job, and the queen on c2 is also doing her job. So we're threatening checkmate on h7, so black does not have time to take the bishop, threatening the rook, because then we have queen h7 checkmate, which I've had numerous games, bullet blitz and rapid games that ended that way. So after knight takes g5, he doesn't have time to take the bishop, so he has to take the knight. And now we have bishop takes knight, and white is up a pawn. White didn't give up the bishop pair, and black's king is much weaker. So this is just a very common tactic that white has, and that's the reason why we play queen to c2 before we castle. So in this game, my opponent played c takes d4. And now it's important that we keep our pawns very solid, and so we take back with the knight. Now the bishop is opened up, so there is no knight to h5 moves after kicking the bishop back. Now he moves his queen here, and this is very instructional. You need to be careful when the queen comes over here pinning the knight, because she also puts pressure on the bishop here. And so you need to take a timeout to move your bishop back. Now our opponent gets really aggressive and attacks us with d5, and we simply ignore that and castle. After he takes, we can take back with our bishop, and our bishop is probably better on c4 than it was on e2. Our opponent slides the queen over to h5. I guess he's posturing that he's going to have some big attack, but I still don't think these pieces leave a very good impression. His rooks, I'm not sure where they're going, so instead of focusing on an attack, my opponent really should have focused on his development. We drop the bishop back to g3. This is a very strong diagonal. I'd say that my bishop is better than his, and the queen really has no checkmating threats. So my opponent continued with pawn to e5, and I inserted the move bishop to e2. The reason I did this is because I want to get his queen to an uncomfortable square. So obviously if he takes my knight, I'm going to take his queen, and we're going to be very happy, trading two minor pieces for a queen. He moves his queen to g5, and now we win a tempo, which means we win time, and we do that by playing knight to f3. You noticed I dropped my bishop back to a safe square. He's no longer threatened by a rook on the c-file attacking the queen. The queen had to move. Now we move our knight, and the queen has to move again. So black spent 1-2 moves doing absolutely nothing, and now he just trades off queens, and now his pawns are much weaker. So the queen is gone, and now this pawn is under attack. So we play knight takes, bishop takes, and I like this bishop here because I'm really ready to trade off dark square bishops if he gives me the chance. He puts his bishop on e6, and I put my bishop on f3. So now you'll see that I kind of like to use my opponent's strategies against them. So oftentimes in the King's Indian, they put a ton of pressure on your queenside pawns, and now I'm actually doing the exact same, only I think that my bishops have real threats, and his bishops don't. So I'd say that white is doing much better here, and don't forget that he still has a damaged pawn structure, and he's down a pawn. So he puts the knight on e4. I trade bishops, which was my plan. He takes back with the king, and now of course we take with the knight. And for some reason he decides not to take back. So if he takes back, we take with the bishop, and then he has to play a move like rook here to guard the pawn. Notice he couldn't push it because then the bishop takes the rook. But instead I think he realized he needed to create some sort of imbalance, and he decides to just not take the knight back. So this knight is hanging, so of course I'm going to move it to safety and attack his bishop. He decides to get his rook onto the 7th rank, so he's trying to get active. He's trying to create some threats, but we trade more material. We just push our pawn to safety. We still have the threat of bishop takes pawn, and my opponent resigned here. So I think the accuracy in this game was like 98% for white. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I just wanted to show you a really quick introduction to the system that I like to play. And that system is simply d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, knight f3, so knights before bishops, d6, bishop g7, castles, e3, knight b to d7, bishop e2, and if he goes c5 or e5, it doesn't matter, we're going to play queen to c2. And I do want to show one interesting variation here. Let's say that he plays the move e5, queen c2, and now let's say he plays the move h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3, knight h5. You notice that knight takes g5 does not work here because he has queen takes knight, which guards his knight, so I don't have bishop takes knight at the end of it. But if he goes for this variation, we actually play knight to d2. Very tricky move here. And the idea is that we're forcing him to take our bishop. So he's going to take our bishop, otherwise why would he go here? pawn takes. Now the rook is on the open H file, and we're actually going to castle queenside. And the attack against black, now that these pawns are super weak, and you notice his light squares are incredibly weak, which means after he trades pawns, let's say pawn takes, he can't actually move the bishop because the bishop is no longer a strong attacker. It's now his only defender. For example, if we win this, we're just threatening queen takes h7 checkmate. For example, if he goes here to pin the bishop, queen h7 check, he goes here. Let's see, where's the mate? We can't go to the corner because the bishop guards. So I think we just castle here, and yeah, this is probably completely losing for him. So this is an example of what you would do if they play the move e5 and then chase your bishop down. But hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Most importantly is that you get this setup. This is your ideal setup. Let's say that they play slow and you castle and they put the bishop here. Now this bishop is strong, and now we can close the door with d5, and now this bishop looks kind of dumb. Let's say he continues with the move like d6. We can put the rooks on the open file. If he takes, knight takes. He can't take here because he's pinned. The rook is always going to be attacking the backwards d6 pawn, and your rooks go here. So your rooks are going to go to the c1 and d1 files, and this is where all of your pieces belong. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. That was just a little introduction to the King's Indian Defense Smyslov / Petrosian system, and I'll catch you later. Take care. Bye.